The screaming started at 3:17 a.m. Not human screaming, mind you. Something far worse. Something that clawed at the edges of sanity with frequencies that shouldn't exist, frequencies that bypassed the ears entirely and went straight for the primitive brainstem where ancient terrors still dwelt. Jake Marrow bolted upright in his makeshift bed above the garage, cold sweat already beading on his forehead as the unearthly wail pierced through 3 inches of reinforced steel and concrete like they were paper. Max, his German Shepherd mix, was already on his feet, hackles raised in a ridge of pure alarm. The dog's eyes, those unnaturally intelligent amber eyes that sometimes seemed too knowing for any earthly creature, were fixed on the garage floor below. His lips pulled back, revealing teeth that gleamed in the sickly green light bleeding through the cracks in the floorboards. "What the hell?" Jake whispered, his voice catching in his throat as another shriek split the night. This one was different, weaker, more desperate, like something dying, like something begging. He'd been working on crashed alien ships for 12 years, ever since the first wave of refugees started falling from the stars like broken angels. He'd heard their death rattles, their final system failures, their automated distress calls in languages that hurt to comprehend. But this was something else entirely. This was alive. This was aware. This was trapped. Jake's hands trembled as he reached for his work coveralls, the fabric rough against skin that felt suddenly too sensitive, too exposed. The green light pulsed below, casting dancing shadows on the ceiling that moved like living things, like grasping fingers, like chains made of light itself. "Stay here, boy," he murmured to Max, but the dog was already padding toward the stairs, muscles coiled with tension that spoke of intelligence far beyond any normal animal. Sometimes Jake wondered if the radiation from all those alien wrecks had changed his companion into something more, something that understood the weight of choices better than most humans ever would. The screaming stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise had been. It pressed against Jake's eardrums like deep water, heavy with the promise of revelation. He could hear his own heartbeat, the whisper of his breath, the soft click of Max's nails on the metal stairs as they descended into the garage proper. The crashed ship dominated the space like a metallic predator, its hull twisted and scarred from atmospheric entry. Jake had been working on it for 3 days, carefully extracting the exotic matter cores and quantum processors that made these vessels tick. Standard salvage work, until tonight, when the ship had started singing. The green light was coming from a section he hadn't accessed yet, a sealed compartment that his scanners had dismissed as empty space. But scanners lied. Scanners couldn't detect the weight of dreams, the density of despair, the specific gravity of a soul in chains. Jake approached with the careful steps of a man who'd learned that alien technology could kill you in ways that defied physics. His toolkit felt inadequate in his hands, simple human tools against mysteries that spanned galaxies. But his fingers knew their work, guided by 12 years of coaxing secrets from dying starships. The hull panel peeled back like skin, revealing a chamber that shouldn't have fit within the ship's dimensions. Geometry bent in ways that made Jake's eyes water, space folding in on itself like origami made of vacuum and void. And there, suspended in the impossible heart of it all, she hung in chains of pure light, arms spread wide in a crucifixion of energy. Her skin was pale as starlight, marked with patterns that shifted and flowed like living tattoos. Humanoid, but not human. Too tall, too perfect, too beautiful in the way that sharp things are beautiful right before they cut you. Her hair moved in a solar wind that existed only around her, silver strands that caught and scattered the green radiance. But it was her eyes that stopped Jake's breath in his throat. They were open, aware, ancient beyond measure, yet desperate with the kind of need that transcended species. When they met his gaze across the impossible space, Jake felt something fundamental shift in his chest, a recognition that bypassed logic and went straight to whatever part of him still believed in fairy tales and lost princesses. She was dying. He could see it in the way the light chains pulsed, drinking her life force one photon at a time. Could feel it in the air itself, thick with the ozone scent of dissipating energy and the copper taste of approaching death. Max whined, a sound full of sympathy that no ordinary dog should possess. The German shepherd's ears were flat against his skull, but he wasn't showing aggression. This was grief, pure and simple. Recognition of suffering that demanded response. "Who are you?" Jake whispered, though he knew she couldn't possibly understand him. Her lips moved, forming words in a language that sounded like solar wind given voice, like the music of dying stars. But somehow, impossibly, meaning bloomed in Jake's mind like dark flowers. Not words, but concepts. Not translation, but understanding. "Help me. Queen of the Seventh Star. Betrayed. Hunted. Time. Running out." Jake's hands moved toward the control panel before his conscious mind made the decision. 12 years of working with alien tech had taught him to read the universal constants: power flow, containment protocols, emergency releases. The chains weren't just restraints. They were a stasis system, keeping her alive while slowly draining her essence. A torture device disguised as mercy. "This is insane," he muttered, fingers dancing over controls that hummed with barely contained power. "I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what you are. I don't know what this will." Her eyes found his again, and in them he saw something that made his hand still on the controls. Not just desperation, but trust. Complete, absolute faith that he would do the right thing. That he would choose compassion over caution, mercy over safety. It reminded him of another pair of eyes, long ago. Human eyes, filled with the same desperate hope. The stranger who'd given him his first real break in the salvage business, who'd trusted him with something valuable when Jake had nothing to offer in return. The kindness that had saved his life when the world seemed determined to grind him under its heel. "Pay it forward." That's what the stranger had said. "Pay it forward." "Max," Jake said, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands. "If this goes wrong, if something happens to me, you know where the emergency beacon is, right?" The dog's amber eyes met his, and Jake could swear he saw understanding there. A nod, subtle but unmistakable. Jake's finger hovered over the release control. One touch, and either he'd free a being who deserved mercy, or unleash something that would damn them all. The weight of choice pressed down on his shoulders like the gravity of collapsing stars. But those eyes, those ancient, desperate, trusting eyes. He pressed the button. The chains exploded in a nova of green light, energy cascading through the chamber like breaking waves. The woman fell forward, gasping, her knees hitting the deck with a sound like breaking crystal. Power coursed over her skin in fading spirals, the tattoo patterns blazing bright before settling into a soft silver glow. She looked up at Jake, and for the first time since he'd opened the chamber, she smiled. It was an expression that could have launched 1,000 ships or ended a dozen wars. Beautiful and terrible and completely alien, yet somehow familiar as sunrise. "You," she said, and her voice was like music played on instruments made of moonbeams. "You chose mercy over safety." "What?" Jake knelt beside her, offering his hand. She took it, her fingers cool as starlight against his palm. "Because someone once chose mercy for me," he said simply, "and because my dog thinks you're worth saving." Max patted closer, his tail offering a tentative wag. The woman, the queen, his mind supplied, reached out to scratch behind the dog's ears. Max leaned into the touch, eyes closing in bliss. "Your companion has unusual wisdom," she said, standing with fluid grace despite her obvious weakness. "He sees what many cannot." "Yeah, Max is special," Jake agreed, watching as his dog practically melted under the alien queen's touch. "Always has been. Sometimes I think he understands things better than I do." The queen studied him with those ancient eyes, and Jake felt like she was reading the story of his life in the lines of his face. "You are Jake Marrow," she said, and it wasn't a question. "The one they call the ship whisperer. The one who makes the impossible repairs. How do you? Your reputation travels far, even to the Seventh Star. When my ship was failing, when the navigation systems were choosing where to crash." She gestured around the garage. "I hope we might find you." That hope was not misplaced. Jake felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I'm just a mechanic. I fix things that break." "You fix things that should not be able to be fixed," she corrected. "You find solutions where others find only failure. This is a rare gift, Jake Marrow. Rarer still is the heart that chooses to use such gifts in service of others." Before Jake could respond, Max's ears perked up. The dog moved to the garage door, hackles rising again. Outside, Jake could hear the distant whine of approaching engines, military grade, by the sound of them. "They followed me," the Queen said, and her voice carried the weight of inevitability. "The Tyrannian Empire does not let its prizes escape easily." Tyrannian Empire? Jake moved to his workbench, fingers already selecting tools by instinct. "Never heard of them." "Consider yourself fortunate. They are collectors of worlds, resources, beings who might prove useful." Her expression hardened, beauty becoming something sharp and dangerous. "They overthrew my kingdom not for its wealth, but for its symbol. A defeated queen, paraded in chains before the conquered worlds, proof that resistance is futile." Jake's hand stilled on his tools. "And you escaped. My ship's captain chose to die rather than deliver me. She programmed the navigation to find someone who might choose mercy over profit." The Queen's eyes found his again. She chose well. The engine's sound were getting closer. Jake's mind raced through possibilities, calculating the distance to the safe house, the time needed to restart her ship's systems, the probability of escape versus the certainty of capture. "How long do we have?" he asked. Max barked once, sharp, urgent. "Not long," the Queen said. Jake moved with the efficiency of desperation, hands flying over the ship's systems. "What's your name? I can't keep thinking of you as the Queen." "Zara," she said, moving to help him despite her obvious exhaustion. "My name is Zara Kytharov, the Seventh Star, first daughter of the Solar Court, keeper of the ancient ways." She paused, a smile tugging at her lips. "But Zara will suffice." "Nice to meet you, Zara," Jake said, wrestling with a stubborn power coupling. "Wish it was under better circumstances." "Circumstances make the measure of character," she replied, her hands moving over alien controls with practiced ease. "These are the circumstances that matter." The garage door exploded inward. Three figures in powered armor strode through the smoking wreckage, weapons raised and targeting systems painting red dots across Jake's chest. Their suits were sleek, predatory things that moved with inhuman grace, and behind their faceplates, Jake could see eyes that glowed with cold intelligence. "Step away from the fugitive," the center figure commanded, its voice electronically filtered into something mechanical and threatening. "By order of the Tyrannian Empire, you are interfering with the apprehension of a Class 7 strategic asset." Jake placed himself between the soldiers and Zara, his tool belt suddenly feeling pathetically inadequate. "She's not an asset. She's a person." "Incorrect. The subject is property of the Empire, as are all resources within claimed territories. Your world falls under our protection. Compliance is mandatory." "Protection?" Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Is that what you call it?" Max growled, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than his throat. The dog's amber eyes were fixed on the lead soldier, lips pulled back to reveal teeth that suddenly seemed longer, sharper than they should be. "An interesting specimen," the soldier observed, weapons swiveling to target the dog. "Enhanced, certainly. We'll take it for study as well." That was when Jake's careful control snapped. "You're not taking anybody," he snarled, finger hitting the emergency power switch on his workbench. Every alien device he'd been working on activated at once, filling the garage with competing energy fields and electromagnetic interference. The soldiers' targeting systems flickered, their sensors overwhelmed by the sudden chaos of overlapping signals. Jake dove for his emergency toolkit, the one he kept for really bad situations. The one filled with devices that weren't exactly legal in most sectors. The modified plasma cutter came alive in his hands, its beam capable of slicing through starship hulls. The first soldier moved with inhuman speed, but Max was faster. The dog launched himself at the armored figure, weight and momentum carrying them both to the ground. There was a sound like breaking glass, and the soldier's faceplate cracked, revealing something that might have once been human, but had been surgically modified beyond easy recognition. Zara was moving too, her hands tracing patterns in the air that left trails of silver light. Ancient words spilled from her lips, and the temperature in the garage plummeted. Frost began forming on the soldiers' armor, and their movements slowed as if they were fighting through quicksand. "Psionic abilities detected," the second soldier reported, raising what looked like a rifle but hummed with the distinctive whine of an energy weapon. Recommend immediate termination. Jake's plasma cutter met the energy rifle in a shower of sparks and molten metal. The soldiers stumbled back, weapon destroyed, but immediately drew a secondary armament from its belt. The battle that followed was chaos given form, a whirlwind of plasma fire, an ancient magic, and perfectly ordinary human determination. Jake found himself moving with reflexes he didn't know he possessed, diving and rolling and striking with tools that became weapons in his desperate hands. Max fought like something wild and primal, his intelligence guiding every attack to maximum effect. But it was Zara who turned the tide. She raised her hands above her head, silver light gathering between her palms like captured starlight. The tattoo patterns on her skin blazed with renewed intensity, and power rolled off her in waves that made the air itself ring like a struck bell. "I am Zara Kithra," she declared, and her voice carried the authority of suns and the patience of geological time. "I am the seventh star's chosen daughter, heir to powers you cannot comprehend. You will not claim me. You will not harm those who showed me mercy." The light between her hands exploded outward, and the three soldiers simply stopped. Not dead, not damaged, but frozen in place like insects trapped in amber. Their armor sparked and failed, systems overwhelmed by energies their creators had never imagined. Jake straightened slowly, plasma cutter still humming in his grip. That was impressive. Zara swayed on her feet, the silver glow fading from her skin. And exhausting. That technique is meant to be performed with a full court of psionics, not. She gestured weakly at herself. Not one half-dead refugee. Max padded over to sniff at the frozen soldiers, tail wagging tentatively. Apparently satisfied they posed no immediate threat, he returned to Zara's side and offered his head for scratching. "Good boy," she murmured, running her fingers through his fur. "You fought well, brave one." Jake holstered his plasma cutter and moved to examine the ship systems. "They'll send more," he said grimly. "These are just scouts. How long before your freezing thing wears off?" "An hour, perhaps 2, Zara admitted. "Not long enough to complete repairs." "Then we don't complete them here." Jake's mind was already racing ahead, calculating distances and possibilities. "I know a place. Old military bunker about 50 kilometers north. Abandoned since the resource wars, but the power systems still work. We can hole up there while I get your ship running." "Why would you do this?" Zara asked quietly. "You've already saved me once. You've already chosen mercy over safety. Why risk more?" Jake paused in his preparations, tools forgotten in his hands. The question hung in the air between them, weighted with more significance than simple words should carry. "Because," he said finally, "someone once told me that kindness is the only thing that makes us more than just clever animals. That mercy is what separates civilization from barbarism." He met her eyes, steady and sure. "Because Max trusts you, and his judgment has never steered me wrong." As if summoned by his name, the German shepherd barked once, sharp and decisive. His amber eyes were fixed on a rear exit, ears swiveling to track sounds only he could hear. "More coming," Jake interpreted. "We need to move. Now." The next 20 minutes were a blur of desperate activity. Jake's mobile workshop, a converted hover truck packed with every tool and spare part he might need, roared to life with a sound like controlled thunder. Zara's ship, still partially dismantled, was loaded onto the truck's heavy-duty trailer with the kind of speed that only comes from well-practiced emergency procedures. Max rode shotgun, his keen senses alert for any sign of pursuit. His unusual intelligence showed in the way he monitored their route, occasionally offering a low whine or bark to suggest alternate paths through the city's labyrinthine industrial district. "Your companion," Zara said as they wound through the darkened streets. "He's not entirely natural, is he?" Jake glanced at Max, who was staring out the windshield with an intensity that bordered on the supernatural. "Found him as a puppy about 8 years ago. He was in one of the first crash sites I worked, just sitting there in the wreckage like he was waiting for someone. No sign of his mother, no other survivors. And you never wondered?" "Oh, I wondered," Jake said, taking a sharp turn that had the trailer's gyro stabilizers whining in protest. Especially when he started anticipating things. When he began understanding complex instructions. when he started looking at alien tech like he recognized it. Max turned to look at them both, and for just a moment, Jake could swear the dog's expression was almost human, almost knowing. Then the moment passed, and he was just a very smart German shepherd again. But wondering and knowing are different things. Jake continued, and honestly, I don't care what he is. He's family. That's enough. Zara reached over to scratch behind Max's ears, and the dog leaned in her touch with obvious pleasure. Family chosen by the heart rather than blood, she murmured. The strongest bonds of all. The bunker emerged from the darkness like something from a fever dream. Concrete and steel and reinforced composites rising from the earth in brutalist defiance of aesthetics. It had been built to withstand nuclear war, alien invasion, and the collapse of civilization itself. Tonight, it would shelter a human mechanic, an alien queen, and a dog who might be more than either. Jake's security codes still worked, a legacy of his brief stint in military engineering before he'd found his true calling in salvage work. The massive doors ground open with the sound of awakening giants, revealing a cavern that could have swallowed a city block. Home sweet home, Jake muttered, guiding the truck into the depths. Emergency lighting flickered to life, casting harsh shadows on walls designed to contain the unthinkable. The work began immediately. Jake's tools sang their familiar songs, the whine of plasma cutters, the hum of quantum screwdrivers, the satisfied click of connections made whole. Zara worked beside him with graceful efficiency, her alien knowledge complementing his human intuition in ways that surprised them both. Max patrolled the perimeter, his enhanced senses alert for any sign of pursuit. Occasionally, he would return to check on their progress, offering quiet whines of encouragement or concern. Your ship, Jake said as he wrestled with a particularly stubborn power coupling. It's not like the others I've worked on. The technology is older, more sophisticated. My people have been traveling the stars since before your species discovered fire, Zara replied, her hands dancing over crystalline control matrices that pulsed with inner light. We learned early that the universe is not kind to the weak or the unprepared. Yet the Tyrannians defeated you. Zara's hands stilled on the controls, and for a moment her expression carried the weight of lost worlds. Not through superior technology or greater numbers. They won because they understood something my people never did. That mercy can be a weakness as easily as it can be a strength. Jake looked up from his work. How so? We could have destroyed them when they first began their expansion. Should have, according to the cold mathematics of survival. But we chose diplomacy. We chose to believe that understanding could overcome ambition, that wisdom could triumph over hunger. Her laugh was bitter as winter wind. We were wrong. Were you? Jake challenged. You're here. You're alive. You escaped because someone chose to sacrifice themselves for you. That doesn't sound like weakness to me. And now I've brought danger to your world, to you, to all those who might choose to help me. How is that not weakness? How is that not the same mistake repeated? Jake set down his tools and turned to face her fully. Because this time, you're not facing them alone. Because this time, you have allies who understand that some things are worth fighting for. Max barked from the entrance, the sound echoing through the bunker like a warning bell. His hackles were raised, ears flat against his skull. Company, Jake said grimly, reaching for his plasma cutter. The sound came first, the whine of approaching engines, multiple sources converging on their position. Then the ground began to shake as heavy vehicles took up positions around the bunker's perimeter. A voice boomed from external speakers, electronically amplified and utterly without mercy. By order of the Tyrannian Empire, you will surrender the fugitive immediately. You have 60 seconds to comply before we begin bombardment. Jake checked the ship's status displays. Still at least 2 hours from flight ready, even if they pushed every system beyond safe parameters. Options, he asked. Zara's hands moved over her ship's weapon systems, but the displays showed only red warnings and system failures. The defensive arrays are still offline. We have no shields, no armaments. She looked at him with eyes that held both resignation and fierce determination. But we have something they don't expect, which is... Her smile was sharp as broken glass. Human ingenuity coupled with alien technology, and a dog who might just be the key to everything. Max had moved to stand beside the ship's primary console, his intelligent eyes fixed on displays that no ordinary animal should be able to read. As Jake watched, the dog placed one paw on a specific control surface, and the entire system configuration changed. Hidden subroutines activated. Dormant programs came online. Weapons systems that had shown as destroyed suddenly blazed with ready status indicators. How did he? Jake began. Because he's not just a dog, Zara said softly. Are you brave one? Max looked at them both, and this time there was no mistaking the intelligence in his amber eyes. Ancient, patient, utterly loyal intelligence. You're one of them, Jake realized. One of Zara's people, aren't you? The countdown reached 30 seconds. Max, or whatever he truly was, made a sound that might have been agreement. Then he was moving, his form beginning to blur and shift like smoke given substance. The familiar shape of the German shepherd stretched and flowed, revealing something altogether more magnificent. When the transformation completed, a being of silver light and flowing energy stood where Max had been. Humanoid, but clearly not human. Tall and graceful with features that echoed Zara's alien beauty. But the eyes remained the same warm amber that had watched over Jake for 8 years. Guardian Prime Kethmar of the 7th Star, Zara whispered, dropping to one knee. My lord, we thought you had perished in the first attack. The being who had been Max spoke, and his voice was like distant thunder given form. I chose to wait, to watch, to learn if this species possessed the qualities necessary for alliance. His amber eyes found Jake's. They do. The countdown reached 10 seconds. Touching reunion, Jake said, moving to the weapons console, but we're about to be vaporized. Any chance we could save the explanations for later? Kethmar, Max, placed his hand on the ship's primary control matrix. Power flowed through the systems like liquid lightning, bringing every circuit online simultaneously. The ship rose from its repair cradle with impossible grace, no longer a damaged refugee vessel, but a predator awakening from slumber. 5 seconds, Zara announced. Jake's finger hovered over the weapons control. I've never fired a starship gun before. Fortunately, Max said, his form beginning to blur again as he resumed his familiar canine shape. I have. The bunker's roof opened like a flower made of metal and stone, revealing the star-scattered sky above. Enemy ships hung in the darkness like mechanical vultures, weapons charged and targeting systems locked onto their position. The first shot came from below, a lance of coherent energy that reached up from the depths of the earth to catch the lead attack ship squarely amidships. The vessel came apart in a flower of fire and debris, its death serving as both warning and declaration. Jake felt the ship's weapons systems respond to his touch like living things, target acquisition flowing through his consciousness with an ease that should have been impossible. This wasn't human technology. It was something far more intuitive, responsive to thought and intent rather than mere mechanical input. How am I doing this? He wondered aloud. Because you've chosen to trust, Zara said, her hands dancing over the navigation controls. Because you've opened your heart to possibility. The ship recognizes that. It knows you. The remaining enemy vessels began their attack in earnest, energy beams and projectile weapons converging on their position. But they were no longer trapped in the bunker. They were rising through the atmosphere like a silver comet, leaving trails of light in their wake. Jake found himself laughing as he returned fire, each shot guided by instincts he'd never known he possessed. This is insane. This is impossible. This is what it means to truly be alive, Zara finished, her own laughter joining his as they broke through the cloud layer and into the endless night above. Max barked once, a sound of pure joy that somehow managed to encompass both his canine persona and his true nature as an ancient guardian of stars. The battle that followed would be remembered in the history books of a dozen worlds. 3 beings, human, alien, and something in between, holding their own against an entire Imperial assault fleet. Jake's human intuition, Zara's royal training, and Max's ancient wisdom combining into something greater than the sum of their parts. But it was what happened next that would change everything. As they fought their way clear of Earth's gravity well, racing toward the hyperspace transition point that would carry them to safety, Jake made a choice that surprised even himself. Wait, he said, hands stilling on the weapons controls. We can't leave. Not like this. Jake, Zara said carefully, the Imperial fleet will regroup. They'll bring reinforcements. If we stay, if we leave, they'll take their anger out on Earth. Jake interrupted. On people who had nothing to do with this. On people who don't even know there's a war happening above their heads. Max whined softly, a sound full of understanding and sympathy. You're talking about fighting an entire Imperial battle group, Zara pointed out. 3 of us against 100 of them. The mathematics of survival. Forget the mathematics, Jake said firmly. What does your heart tell you? Zara was quiet for a long moment, her ancient eyes fixed on the tactical display showing the enemy ships converging on their position. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of queens and the wisdom of ages. My heart tells me that mercy without courage is meaningless. That kindness without the will to defend it is just pretty words. She looked at Jake with something that might have been love, or respect, or recognition of a kindred spirit. My heart tells me that you are the best of what your species can become. And Max? Jake asked, reaching down to scratch behind the dog's familiar ears. What do you say, boy? Ready for one more impossible fight? The being who was both Max and Kethmar looked up at him with amber eyes that held the patience of stars and the fierce loyalty of pack bonds. His tail wagged once, decisive, determined, utterly committed. Then let's show them what mercy looks like when it grows teeth, Jake said, turning the ship back toward Earth. What followed was less a battle than a revelation. Jake's human adaptability, Zara's royal power, and Max's ancient knowledge merged into something the Tyrannian Empire had never encountered. A force that fought not for conquest or dominance, but for the simple right of beings to choose their own destiny. Ship after ship fell to their combined assault, but it wasn't the victory that mattered. It was what came after. As the surviving Imperial vessels fled back to whatever dark corner of space had spawned them, Jake found himself looking at Earth with new eyes. Not as a backwater world on the galactic frontier, but as something precious and worth protecting. A place where mercy could still triumph over might, where kindness could still change the course of history. So what now? He asked as they settled into a parking orbit above his homeworld. Now, Zara said, moving closer to him in the ship's cramped cockpit. We have choices to make. I could return to my people, try to rebuild what was lost. Or I could stay here, help prepare your world for what's coming. Because they will come, Jake. The Tyrannians, others like them. The universe is full of empires that see mercy as weakness. Jake looked down at Earth, at the blue marble that held everything he'd ever known and loved. Then he looked at Zara, at this magnificent being who had trusted him with her life and her freedom. Finally, he looked at Max, who was somehow both the dog who'd been his companion for 8 years and an alien guardian older than human civilization. I guess we better get to work then, he said simply. But the story didn't end there. Stories like this never really end. They just transform into new beginnings. In the weeks that followed, Jake found himself at the center of something unprecedented. First contact, they called it, though that seemed inadequate for the reality of what was happening. Zara's presence on Earth opened doors that had been closed since the first alien ships began falling from the sky. Suddenly, the crashed vessels weren't just sources of salvage. They were messages, communications from a galaxy full of refugees and rebels, outcasts and freedom fighters. Jake's garage became something between an embassy and a resistance headquarters. His reputation as the ship whisperer took on new meaning as beings from across the galaxy sought him out, drawn by stories of the human who had chosen mercy over profit, who had risked everything to save a stranger. Max, still maintaining his canine disguise most of the time, served as both translator and guardian, his true nature known only to a select few. But his presence lent weight to Jake's growing reputation. Even the most paranoid refugees trusted the human who was vouched for by a guardian prime of the 7th star. Zara became something entirely new. No longer just a queen in exile, but a bridge between worlds. Her royal training and Jake's practical knowledge proved to be a combination that could solve problems neither could have handled alone. Diplomatic protocols married to human ingenuity. Ancient wisdom wedded to innovative thinking. But it wasn't easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is. The Tyrannian Empire didn't simply disappear after their defeat over Earth. If anything, they became more dangerous, wounded predators lashing out at anything within reach. Other powers took notice of the small blue world that had somehow managed to bloody the Empire's nose. Some came as potential allies. Others came as potential conquerors. Jake found himself learning the hard truth that Zara had tried to warn him about. That mercy without strength was just an invitation for others to take advantage. That kindness had to be backed up with the will to defend it, or became meaningless. The garage expanded, first into the neighboring buildings, then into a proper facility that could handle ships from across the galaxy. Jake's team of mechanics grew to include beings from a dozen different worlds, all united by the simple principle that everyone deserved a chance at freedom. But it was the small moments that mattered most. Quiet evenings when Jake and Zara would sit on the facility's observation deck, watching Earth turn below them while Max dozed at their feet. Conversations that ranged from the technical details of hyperdrive maintenance to the philosophical implications of mercy in an uncaring universe. "Do you ever regret it?" Zara asked one night as they watched the aurora dance across Earth's polar regions. "The choice you made that first night, the decision to free me." Jake considered the question seriously. In the months since that night, his life had been turned upside down. His quiet existence as a salvage mechanic had been replaced by the chaos of interstellar politics and the constant threat of imperial retaliation. He'd seen wonders beyond imagination and horrors that still haunted his dreams. "No," he said finally, "not for a second. Because look what we built." Below them, the facility hummed with activity. Ships from across the galaxy docked for repairs, their crews sharing stories and information that was slowly building into a network of resistance against tyranny in all its forms. Human engineers worked alongside alien technicians, learning from each other and creating innovations that neither could have achieved alone. "Besides," Jake added, reaching down to scratch behind Max's ears, "I gotta find out that my dog is actually an ancient alien guardian. That's gotta count for something." Max opened one amber eye and fixed Jake with a look that clearly said, "You're never going to let me live that down, are you?" "Never," Jake confirmed, grinning. Zara laughed, the sound like silver music in the darkness. "And what of the future? The Empire will return, probably with reinforcements. Other powers are taking notice of Earth. Some friendly, others less so." Jake's expression grew thoughtful as he watched a cargo ship from the Centauri colony's dock at their facility. The crew was human, but they carried technology that would have been pure fantasy just a year ago. Progress, he supposed, came in many forms. "Then we'll be ready," he said with quiet conviction. "Not just Earth, but all of us. Every world that values freedom over submission. Every species that believes in choice over coercion." Max lifted his head, ears perking up at something only he could hear. After a moment, he relaxed, but his alert posture reminded them all that even in moments of peace, vigilance was necessary. "You speak of an alliance," Zara mused. "A confederation of free worlds standing against the Empire. It's been tried before, you know. The mathematics of space warfare favors centralized power over distributed resistance." "Maybe," Jay conceded. "But those other alliances didn't have something we have." "Which is?" Jake gestured toward the facility below, where beings from a dozen different worlds worked side by side, sharing knowledge and resources with an efficiency that defied political science. They didn't have the human ability to see potential in broken things, to take what's damaged and make it better than it was before. As if to prove his point, a salvage team returned from a distant system, their cargo hold filled with the wreckage of a ship that had been destroyed in an Imperial raid. Within hours, Jake's mixed-species crew would strip it down to components, analyze the technology, and rebuild it into something new. Something better. Something that could carry refugees to safety or supplies to those who needed them. "The Empire sees conquest," Jake continued. "We see collaboration. They see subjects. We see partners. That difference, I think that's going to matter more than fleet sizes or weapons technology." Zara moved closer to him on the observation deck's bench, her shoulder touching his as they watched the stars wheel overhead. "And if you're wrong? If mercy and kindness aren't enough to stand against ships and soldiers?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, thinking of all the choices that had led them to this point. The decision to free Zara from her chains of light. The choice to fight the Imperial scouts rather than surrender. The determination to build something better from the ashes of the old. Then at least we'll go down fighting for something worth believing in, he said finally. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's all any of us can really do. Make the choices that let us sleep at night, and hope they add up to something meaningful. Max made a soft sound that might have been agreement, or approval, or simply the contentment of a being who had found his pack and intended to defend it. The months that followed proved Jake's optimism wasn't entirely misplaced. Word of the facility spread through underground networks and resistance cells across the galaxy. Ships arrived daily, some carrying refugees seeking sanctuary, others bearing information about Imperial movements or requests for technical assistance. Jake found himself becoming something he'd never expected, a leader, not through any formal appointment or political maneuvering, but through the simple fact that beings from across the galaxy trusted him to do the right thing. His reputation as the mechanic who had chosen mercy over profit preceded him to worlds he'd never heard of, opening doors that had been closed to more conventional diplomats. The work was exhausting. Every day brought new challenges, new crises that required immediate attention. A colony world under siege needed defensive systems. A refugee convoy required escort through Imperial space. A rebellion on the far rim needed weapons and supplies. But it was also exhilarating. Jake had spent his life fixing broken machines, but now he was helping to repair something much more complex and vital, the fabric of civilization itself. Every successful mission, every life saved, every small victory against tyranny felt like validation of the choices he'd made that first night in his garage. Zara proved to be an invaluable partner in ways that went far beyond her royal training. Her understanding of galactic politics and her personal connections among the resistance movements made her the perfect complement to Jake's practical problem-solving approach. Together, they began to weave a network of alliances that transcended species boundaries and traditional political structures. Max remained an enigma wrapped in the form of a loyal dog. Most of the facility's inhabitants continued to see him as simply Jake's unusually intelligent pet, unaware of his true nature. But those who knew the truth, a small circle of trusted allies, came to understand that his presence lent their cause a legitimacy that no amount of political maneuvering could have achieved. The Guardian Primes were legendary figures in galactic history, beings of such ancient wisdom and power that most species regarded them as myths. Having one openly support their rebellion sent shockwaves through both the resistance networks and the Imperial command structure. But perhaps the most important development was something Jake hadn't expected: the way his own species responded to the revelation that they weren't alone in the universe. Humanity, it turned out, had a gift for the kind of adaptive thinking that the galaxy desperately needed. Where other species saw insurmountable problems, humans saw engineering challenges. Where others accepted the limitations of existing technology, humans asked, what if we tried it this way instead? The facility became a breeding ground for innovation as human creativity merged with alien knowledge. Hybrid technologies emerged that neither side could have developed alone. Weapons systems that turned Imperial strength against itself. Defensive networks that adapted in real time to new threats. Communication systems that could coordinate resistance activities across vast distances without being detected. Jake often found himself marveling at the irony. The Empire had come to Earth expecting to find another weak world to be absorbed into their growing domain. Instead, they had awakened something that might ultimately prove to be their undoing, a species that refused to accept that things had to remain the way they were. But success brought its own dangers. The facility's growing influence hadn't gone unnoticed by the Empire's intelligence networks. Reports filtered in of Imperial agents attempting to infiltrate resistance cells, of informants offering rewards for information about the human facility and its mysterious leaders. More troubling were the signs that the Empire was adapting its tactics. Where once they had relied on brute force and overwhelming firepower, they were now employing more subtle approaches. Psychological warfare, economic pressure, political manipulation designed to turn potential allies against each other. They're learning, Zara observed during one of their evening strategy sessions. The three of them, Jake, Zara, and Max in his human form, sat around a holographic display showing the latest intelligence reports. The Empire is starting to understand that this rebellion is different from the others they've faced. Different how? Jake asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Previous resistance movements were built around charismatic leaders or shared ideologies. Max explained, his form flickering slightly as he maintained his humanoid appearance. Eliminate the leadership or corrupt the ideology, and the movement collapses. But this. He gestured at the display, which showed a web of interconnected nodes representing resistance cells across the galaxy. This is built around something much more fundamental, around the simple belief that beings should be free to choose their own destiny. You can't kill an idea like that. You can only prove it right or wrong through your actions. Jake studied the display, noting how the network had grown from a single point, their facility, into something that spanned dozens of star systems. Each node represented thousands of beings who had chosen to risk everything for the chance at freedom. So what's their play? He asked. If they can't cut off the head or corrupt the message, what do? Zara's expression was grim. They try to make the cost of resistance so high that people choose submission instead. They escalate. They make examples that are too terrible to ignore. As if summoned by her words, an urgent communication came through from one of their scout networks. The message was brief but devastating. The Empire had just glassed an entire colony world. Kepler, 442b, home to over 50 million beings, as punishment for harboring resistance sympathizers. The silence that followed the report was deafening. 50 million lives, erased from existence because they had dared to dream of freedom. Jake felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. This was the price of their success. Innocent beings paying with their lives for the hope that his facility represented. We could stop, he said quietly. Disband the network. Go back to just repairing ships and staying out of galactic politics. Maybe if we disappeared, they'd leave the other world alone. Max's amber eyes fixed on him with an intensity that seemed to pierce straight through to his soul. And how long do you think that peace would last? How long before they decided that Earth itself was too dangerous to leave unconquered? Besides, Zara added, her voice soft but implacable, it's too late for that. The idea has already spread too far. Even if we disbanded tomorrow, others would carry it forward. The Empire knows this. That's why they're trying to make the cost unbearable. Jake stared at the display showing the burning wreckage of what had once been a thriving world. 50 million beings who had died because they believed in something better. 50 million martyrs whose sacrifice demanded response. Then we make sure their deaths mean something, he said finally. We make sure that what happened to Kepler, 442b, never happens again. The next phase of their resistance began with a single word: sanctuary. If the Empire wanted to escalate, Jake decided, then they would escalate too. But not through violence, through protection. They would create a network of safe worlds, heavily defended systems where refugees could find shelter and resistance fighters could regroup and refit. It was an ambitious plan that would require resources they didn't have and technology that barely existed. But Jake had learned something important during his years as a salvage mechanic. Sometimes the most broken things could be rebuilt into something magnificent. The first sanctuary world was established in the Vega system, a star with no habitable planets, but plenty of asteroids rich in rare minerals. Working with a team of engineers from a dozen different species, Jake oversaw the construction of a massive space habitat that could house millions of refugees while maintaining complete defensive autonomy. The habitat was a marvel of hybrid engineering, human adaptive thinking combined with alien technological mastery. Its defensive systems could repel an Imperial battle group, while its internal environment provided safety and comfort for beings from across the galaxy. Solar collectors provided unlimited power, while hydroponic farms ensured food security. But more importantly, it provided something that couldn't be measured in defensive capabilities or population capacity: hope. Word of the first sanctuary spread through resistance networks like wildfire. Here was proof that the rebels weren't just fighting against something. They were building towards something better. A future where freedom wasn't just a dream, but a living reality. Other sanctuary worlds followed. Some were hidden asteroid bases like the first. Others were marginally habitable planets that could be terraformed using hybrid technologies. A few were existing worlds whose populations had chosen to openly join the resistance, accepting the protection of a sanctuary network in exchange for their commitment to freedom. Each new sanctuary made the network stronger, more resilient. The Empire could destroy individual worlds, but they couldn't be everywhere at once. And every atrocity they committed only strengthened the resolve of those who opposed them. Jake found himself traveling constantly, moving from world to world to oversee construction projects and coordinate defensive strategies. It was dangerous work. Imperial agents were everywhere, and there was a substantial bounty on his head. But it was also deeply satisfying. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was truly making a difference. Not just fixing broken machines, but helping to repair the fundamental damage that tyranny inflicted on the galaxy. Zara traveled with him on most of these missions, her diplomatic skills proving invaluable in negotiations with potential allies. Her presence also provided a powerful symbol, a queen who had chosen to stand with the common beings of the galaxy rather than seek to reclaim her throne through force. Max remained their constant companion, sometimes in his canine form, and sometimes revealing his true nature as Guardian Prime Kethmar. His ancient wisdom proved crucial in navigating the complex web of galactic politics, while his tactical expertise helped design defensive systems that could hold off Imperial attacks. But it was during the mission to establish the seventh sanctuary world that everything changed. They were in the Proxima Centauri system, working with a coalition of human colonists and alien refugees to transform a marginally habitable world into a proper sanctuary. The work was proceeding smoothly when their long-range sensors detected an incoming Imperial fleet. Not just any fleet, the Emperor's personal armada, led by his flagship, the Dominator. 200 vessels strong, carrying enough firepower to reduce entire star systems to cosmic dust. They're not just coming to destroy this world, Zara realized as they analyzed the sensor data. They're coming to make a statement, to show the galaxy what happens to those who defy the Empire. Jake studied the tactical display, his mind racing through possibilities. The sanctuary's defenses were strong, but not strong enough to hold off a force of this magnitude. They had maybe 6 hours before the Imperial fleet arrived. Not enough time to evacuate the millions of beings who had found refuge on the world below. "We could run," he said, though the words tasted like ash in his mouth. "Take as many as we can and retreat to another system. And leave the rest to die," Zara finished. Just like Kepler, 442b. Max, in his human form, was studying the sensor readings with an expression of deep concentration. "There might be another way," he said slowly, "but it would require a sacrifice that I'm not sure any of us are prepared to make." "What kind of sacrifice?" Jake asked, though he was already dreading the answer. "The kind that changes everything," Max replied. "The kind that turns the tide of a war but costs more than we ever intended to pay." Before he could explain further, alarms began sounding throughout the facility. The Imperial fleet had dropped out of hyperspace 6 hours early, having pushed their drives beyond safe parameters in their eagerness to deliver their message of terror. They had less than an hour to prepare for the final battle. Jake's mind worked with crystalline clarity as he coordinated the sanctuary's defenses. Emergency protocols activated across the system. Civilian populations moved to shelters. Defensive systems powered up. Distress signals sent to other sanctuary worlds. But even as he worked, he knew it wouldn't be enough. The math was simple and brutal. They were outnumbered 50-1 by ships that were individually more powerful than anything in their fleet. "Jake," Zara said, appearing at his side as he worked the tactical console. "There's something you need to know. Something Max and I have been discussing." "What?" he asked, not looking up from his displays. "Guardian Primes. We're not just ancient beings with advanced knowledge. We're conduits, living links to the fundamental forces that hold the galaxy together." She paused, her expression heavy with the weight of revelation. "Under extreme circumstances, we can channel those forces directly. But doing so burns out the conduit," Max finished, approaching them with his amber eyes blazing with inner fire. "It's a one-time ability. Use it, and the Guardian Prime ceases to exist." Jake's hands stilled on the controls. "You're talking about suicide." "I'm talking about transformation," Max corrected. "My existence as Kethmar would end, but the energy released would create something new. A protective field that could encompass this entire system, shielding it from any attack." "For how long?" "Forever," Zara whispered. A Guardian Prime's sacrifice creates a permanent sanctuary, a place where the fundamental laws of physics themselves reject violence and oppression. Jake turned to look at his companion, the being who had been his loyal dog for 8 years, who had revealed himself as an ancient guardian only to continue serving with the same faithful devotion. The thought of losing him was almost unbearable. "There has to be another way," he said desperately. "Perhaps," Max acknowledged, "but not one that saves everyone. Not one that guarantees that this sanctuary will endure to protect the innocent for all time." The Imperial fleet was accelerating now, their weapons charging for the opening bombardment. Jake could see them on the tactical display like a swarm of metal predators descending on their prey. "I won't ask you to do this," he said firmly. "I won't order a friend to die for my ideals." Max smiled, an expression that was both entirely alien and completely familiar. "You're not ordering me to do anything, Jake. You're not even asking. I'm choosing. Just like you chose to free Zara from her chains. Just like you chose to fight instead of surrendering. Just like you chose to build something better instead of accepting what was." The first Imperial missiles launched, streaking across space toward the sanctuary world. "I choose to protect what we've built," Max continued, his form beginning to glow with inner light. "I choose to ensure that this place remains a beacon of hope for all who seek freedom. I choose to prove that love and sacrifice are stronger than fear and tyranny." Jake reached out to touch his friend's shoulder, but his hand passed through light instead of solid flesh. The transformation had already begun. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything. For 8 years of loyalty. For revealing the truth when it mattered. For being the best friend a man could ask for." Max's form was becoming increasingly indistinct, but his voice remained clear and strong. "Thank you for showing me what mercy looks like in practice. For teaching me that compassion and courage can coexist. For proving that the choice to help a stranger can change the course of history." The Imperial missiles struck the sanctuary's outer defenses, their nuclear fires blooming like deadly flowers against the protective shields. But even as they hit, something else was happening. Light erupted from where Max had been standing. Not the harsh glare of weapons fire, but something warm and golden and infinitely welcoming. It spread outward in a wave that encompassed the entire system, touching every moon and asteroid and comet with gentle radiance. When the light reached the Imperial fleet, something unprecedented happened. Their weapons simply stopped working. Not destroyed, not disabled, but fundamentally unable to function within the field of protection that Max's sacrifice had created. Ships designed for war and conquest drifted helplessly as their targeting systems failed to lock onto anything within the protected zone. Missiles detonated harmlessly in empty space, their guidance systems unable to navigate toward any target that might cause harm to the innocent. The Dominator itself, the Emperor's mighty flagship, found itself as helpless as a sailing ship becalmed in an airless sea. From the observation deck of the Sanctuary Station, Jake and Zara watched as the Imperial fleet struggled to comprehend what had happened to them. Some ships tried repeatedly to fire their weapons, only to have them fail each time. Others attempted to ram the protected worlds, only to find their engines inexplicably cutting out whenever they approached. "It's not just a defensive field," Zara realized, tears streaming down her face as she mourned the loss of her ancient guardian. "It's something much more fundamental. Max has written new physical laws for this system. Violence simply cannot exist here." Jake nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. On the tactical display, he could see the Imperial fleet beginning to withdraw, their mission impossible to complete. But the victory fell hollow without Max there to share it. Then, impossibly, he heard a familiar bark. Turning, he saw a shape materializing from the golden light. Canine, but somehow more than any ordinary dog. Max was there, his amber eyes warm with affection and his tail wagging with pure joy. "Ow," Jake began. "A Guardian Prime sacrifice doesn't destroy the being," Zara explained, her voice thick with emotion. "It transforms them. Max can never leave this system now. He is the system, in a very real sense. But he's also more himself than he's ever been." The dog, who was still Max, but also somehow much more, padded over to Jake and placed his head against the human's leg. The touch was warm and solid and utterly real. "You're okay," Jake whispered, dropping to his knees to embrace his friend. "You're really okay." Max barked once, a sound that somehow conveyed amusement, affection, and gentle reproof all at once. Of course he was okay. Had Jake really doubted that a Guardian Prime would know exactly what he was doing? In the weeks that followed, the Proxima Sanctuary became something unique in galactic history. A star system where war was literally impossible. Beings from across the galaxy came to witness the miracle, to experience a place where weapons could not function and violence could not exist. The psychological effect on the galaxy was profound. Here was proof that the Resistance's ideals weren't just naive dreams, but achievable realities. That peace wasn't just the absence of war, but something that could be actively created and maintained. Other Guardian Primes began emerging from hiding, inspired by Max's example. Not all chose his path of ultimate sacrifice, but many offered their knowledge and support to the growing sanctuary network. The Empire found itself facing something it had never encountered before, a form of resistance that couldn't be crushed through superior firepower. How do you conquer worlds where your weapons simply refuse to work? How do you intimidate beings who have seen definitive proof that love is stronger than hate? Jake established his primary headquarters in the Proxima Sanctuary, partly for the obvious strategic advantages, but mostly because he couldn't bear to leave Max behind. The dog remained his constant companion, somehow managing to be simultaneously the loyal pet he'd always been and the ancient guardian he'd revealed himself to be. "Any regrets?" Zara asked one evening as they watched the sunset from the observation deck of their facility. The sky was painted in shades of gold and amber, colors that seemed to echo the protective field that surrounded their world. Jake considered the question seriously. His life bore no resemblance to what it had been 2 years ago. Instead of quietly repairing salvaged ships in his garage, he was coordinating a galaxy-spanning resistance movement. Instead of worrying about paying rent, he was helping to establish new civilizations. Instead of being alone with his dog, he was surrounded by beings from dozens of different worlds. "No," he said finally, "not one. Everything we've lost, everything we've sacrificed, it's all been worth it to build this." He gestured toward the facility below, where beings who had once been enemies worked side by side on projects that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago. Human children played with alien younglings in the gardens. Refugees who had lost everything found new purpose in helping others escape tyranny. Besides, he added, reaching down to scratch behind Max's ears, some things you don't really lose. They just transform into something better. Max wagged his tail in agreement, his amber eyes reflecting the golden light of the sanctuary that had become his body and soul. The war against the Empire wasn't over, might never truly be over as long as beings existed who valued power over freedom. But something fundamental had changed in the galaxy's balance. The Resistance was no longer just fighting against tyranny. They were building towards something immeasurably better. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth that Jake had learned in a cluttered garage on a backwater world. That mercy and courage, working together, could accomplish miracles that sheer force never could. The story continues, as all the best stories do, in the choices made by ordinary beings who decide to do extraordinary things. In the moment when someone chooses to help a stranger rather than ignore their plight. In the decision to build rather than destroy, to protect rather than exploit, to love rather than fear. The chains of the cosmos are not made of metal or energy, but of the connections between beings who refuse to accept that cruelty is inevitable. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, you get the chance to forge links in that chain yourself. Jake Marrow, former salvage mechanic turned galactic revolutionary, had learned that lesson well. And in the golden light of the Proxima Sanctuary, surrounded by friends who had once been strangers and protected by love that had transformed itself into physical law, he knew that the lesson would endure long after his own story had ended. Some things, after all, are too important to remain merely human.